for that person who knows that their life is to make a mark in the world. They're supposed to do something that matters, and they're trying to figure out how to live at their optimal level. And so in the middle of the book, I actually put a triad around self-mastery. Over the years and years that I've observed leadership, I've interviewed the most powerful and effective leaders in the world, I found consistent patterns of how they engage their life. One of the chapters in the book, I believe it's Code 5, is that the warrior owns defeat. I think it's the shortest chapter in the book and maybe the most important chapter. It deals with personal ownership and responsibility. It's one of the profound things I think that you learn over a lifetime is that when you own defeat, defeat will never own you. If you do not take responsibility for failure, you are powerless to change the course of your life. And I've seen a cultural pattern where people are always blaming someone else. In fact, you see this in athletes. When they win, they take credit for being the star. When they lose, they say their team isn't good enough.
Wow.
Fire the coach.
Yeah, they're firing the coach. They're getting rid of the players. And one of the huge shifts a person has to make is that if you blame someone else, you are now powerless to bring the change.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you blame someone else for your life, your circumstances, your situation, the problem is that someone else may actually be to blame for part of it. But even if it's not your fault, it's still your responsibility. So I can spend my whole life blaming everyone. I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. I never knew my real father. I came from a real tumultuous family situation. I was in a psychiatric chair by the time I was 12 years old. I could spend my whole life blaming other people for the life I never chose to live.
Wow.
Or I can stop giving them power over my life and say, my life is mine to decide, to take mastery over my life, to take responsibility for where I am. And when that happens, you finally have the power to bring the changes you want to change. Adam and Eve, when they broke their relationship with God, the first thing it did was blame. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the snake, and the snake had no one to blame. And I think what you find is the brokenness in the human psyche is that we shift blame so that we don't have to take responsibility. That chapter is, to me, the most important chapter in terms of taking ownership of your life. If you do not like where your life is, stop blaming other people, stop blaming your past, stop blaming your circumstances, take responsibility for your life, and watch what God can do with that.
Beautiful. Good. And your vernacular is somewhat different, but aren't you talking about victim mentality when you're talking about this, that's really one of the biggest anchors to a person moving on in a life and accomplishing thing that God has for them to do. So basically blaming your upbringing, blaming your victim mentality is kind of the worst case scenario for someone. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's subtle too, because once we had these frameworks of whether something was right or wrong, or somebody was good or bad, and now we have this framework of you're either a victim or a victimizer.
Okay. And
there doesn't seem to be a third option. So it pushes everybody toward being a victim because no one wants to be a victimizer.
Right.
And I do think we have this cultural mentality that we're all victims. And because of that, we end up living our lives powerless. And here's the crazy thing. The very person who says, the reason I'm this way is because of all these things, there's someone standing next to them who went through more.
Yeah.
And so you realize that resilience has very little to do with what you go through, but what you actually build within yourself. And so you're right, there is this culture of victimization, and we have to be careful because the moment you see yourself as a victim, you choose your powerlessness. By the way, this is why forgiveness is so important, because when you actually have been hurt by someone, when you have been wounded by someone, when you've been victimized, because there are people who actually are victims, and they've been victimized, if you don't forgive, you actually live in that past experience the rest of your life.
Right.
Wow.
And you give a person who should have never had any power of your life, continued power of your life.
Right.
The only way you can break the power of that victimizer from your life is actually forgiveness.
Yeah.
And when you forgive, you move forward.
Amazing.
Because you find so many people that get stuck in a time and they can never get past that time in their life.
They're living in that moment.
Yeah.
And isn't it tragic to live in your worst moment?
Wow.
And that's what bitterness does. Yeah. Bitterness makes you a prisoner. in your worst moment.
And that person can be dead and not even here and still mind.
And if they're unrepentant, in which it drives a person crazy, why should I forgive a person who's not sorry?
Right.
And you go, because they moved on.
Yeah.
Because they moved into their darkness. You're the only one trapped there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So why leave yourself there when they've moved on?